Are you ready to untangle from your past, recover from heartbreak, and revive your life? This is Soul CPR with your host, Ann Papayotti. We've all had soul-crushing experiences and lost ourselves in our pain, but there is a way out. On this podcast, Amazon best-selling author, award-winning life coach, and advice columnist Ann Papayotti helps us navigate the path from heartbreak to healing. So now, please welcome the host of Soul CPR, Ann Papayotti.
Hello, and thank you for joining me today. We're going to get raw and real, and I'm going to do my very best to not get emotional. But the fact is that I downplayed and minimized the abuse and violence in my first marriage. And I did so for many reasons, and many of the reasons that you may be able to relate to if you also have been in or are in a domestic violence situation. I never had the classic black eye. And my husband was the tall, dark, and handsome former university football player who became the charismatic top salesman of his company. So who would believe what was happening behind closed doors at my home? And he was the man that I had said I do to and conceived 2 sons with. So what did this actually say about me? And the more that he told me that it was my fault, or when he went too far and promised to change and reminded me that it was my Christian duty to give him grace, the longer I stayed. And the longer I stayed, the further I withdrew from family and friends and community and found myself truly isolated. I had committed for better or worse, and this is what I got. But I was loyal to my vows and my religion. But before I became that vulnerable young woman who fell into his trap, and I say trap because he even admitted that his greatest sales job was actually getting me to marry him. I had been a happy, mild-mannered girl who had many friends, loved school, and had dreams of a traditional family in my little hometown, and with probably a local boy. And it was in those days when I first met my 2 guests at our high school. They were friends and we were all acquaintances, and Facebook reunited us. And it allowed us to grow deeper connections and share the directions our lives took after we left the circular hallways of what was a UFO architectural styled high school, Huffman High School, our beloved school. So today, from those very hallways, I'm delighted to have a sister domestic violence survivor, Lee Hayes, join me once again on the show. Lee was with me back, I believe it was in March of this year, as a guest, and she shared her very personal story with domestic abuse. And that was on episode 6. And you can go back and listen to the details of her story. It was very powerful. And that episode is titled The Aftermath of Domestic Abuse. Lee is a graduate of the University of Alabama and is an experienced and versatile marketing and communications professional. Currently, she is the Director of Sales and Marketing for the Fairways at Grayson Valley. She's also the mom of an incredible young man whom I have the pleasure to also know. She has a couple of rescued fur babies, some wonderful dogs, Bonnie and Clyde, and a very bad cat named Mavi. But throughout her life, she has worked with numerous agencies and served on many boards to make a positive difference in the lives of others. And she continues to do so. But most of all, she is a survivor. Leanne, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Ann, and what a nice intro. Thank you.
Of course, of course. And then we're honored to also have our mutual friend, Al Easton, join us for this conversation today as well. And Al served 6 years in the U.S. Navy out of high school. And then he went on to spend 25 years in the police department before retiring. He spent 18 years in the patrol division, serving both as an officer and a sergeant before becoming a training sergeant for the final 7 years of that career. He also is a firearms instructor and a crisis negotiator for the department. But most of all, having worn both the uniforms of the military and law enforcement, he is a protector. Al, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you for being here, both of you. So let's start with where and how we all met in that UFO design school in those hallways. Do either of you recall the first time you two met?
I do not.
Alan, well, my guess would be it would have been the first day of school, my freshman year, when you guys would all stand at the end or in the hallways of this round building and tell us freshmen that the way to our class was down the hall and to the left, and then laughed when we circled back around again. That would be my bet, but I'm not sure.
And I
You
can't remember, so I'll have to agree with whatever she says.
Okay, well, I don't doubt that at all because I'm sure they singled you out because Liam, what I remember about you was it was one of our maybe our very first assembly in the auditorium, and Lance Doss, who was a senior, was our big orange, our mascot, and they called some freshman girls up on stage, and you were among those, and you were pretty and popular, and ended up being like our class favorite and a homecoming representative. And all I knew is I wanted to know you, and that's what I first remember about you. And Al, what I remember about you, and forgive me if I call you Alan because that's how I remember you, and Lee, I call Leanne. But our sophomore year, or my sophomore year, and Leanne's sophomore year, I was dating Jack Godwin, and the two of you were seniors on the varsity baseball team. And yeah, you guys did something kind of crazy that year, and it looks kind of similar
Really?
now. Yeah, you
Well, the
shaved.
same thing. Wow, that was actually a group of athletes because I was not on the baseball team. I was on a football team. But
Oh,
that was just a bunch of athletes. We happened to be in the same area at the same time, and then we got the notice to shave our heads. And only one
oh.
of us still resembles that.
I don't know. What I remember was that Jack was scared, and he was scared of you. Do you remember that?
I don't remember him being scared of me. I remember him running. I don't know if he was scared when he ran.
But and you were not even a police officer yet, but he ran, and I can tell you he was scared of you. Well, let's pull up a couple of pictures from high school. Caleb, do you have a picture of the girls? There's lovely Leanne on the left, and that's me in the center, and that was our friend Joan Cutcliffe on the right. What baby faces. I call that tight skin now.
I know, right?
Yes.
I think you can feel that one of us rolled out of bed and pulled their hair up and went to class and was probably late, but
Well, one thing I can say, I was never late. That was something that's still a value for me, is on time. Let's see, Caleb, we've got one of those boys with those shaved heads. There we go. And I just drew an arrow straight down to Mr. Alan Eason. And what I love, and this was not the school newspaper, this was the Birmingham News, right,
Yeah,
Al? Yeah.
that's correct.
And it says, "Will it grow out in time for the prom?" And that's our friend Jenny right there standing in front of all those boys. Will it grow out in time for the prom? That was the reason I believe our friend Jack ran, because he had a head full of hair and he did not want
We
to
did.
fall for the prom.
Yeah.
But anyway, all right. So there's those athletes with their shaved heads. And was it just a joke, a bribe, or was it for charity?
I think it was just a joke or dare,
A
really.
dare. A
And
dare.
I
and
think
it
it was
took off.
there.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a
All right. Well, he's going to get off the hook at this point. Thank you, Caleb, for putting that up there. And it's funny how we go back to high school and we have these memories, but it is something that we all shared in common. But things we didn't share in common is what happened after high school, right? So right after high school, Al, you went straight into the Navy for those 6 years, and
correct.
and and then came back and joined the police force, where you remained for 25 years. And I imagine in those 18 years on patrol, you did get a few calls for domestic violence, correct? And when I
Correct.
think about the statistics of domestic violence and the fact that I believe it's 12 million people are affected either with physical, sexual, or stalking on an annual
Yes.
basis, that you had your fair share of those kinds of calls. So what was the most common type of domestic violence response call that you had to respond to?
The ones that I responded to, remember this was a good 15 or so years ago, so laws
Right.
were different back then. Once they classified as couples and marriages. So at the time, calls between married couples, male and female couples, is what I remember responding to the most.
Yeah. And was it usually physical violence or that you saw? Yeah.
Yes, yes. Most of it would be physical,
Mhm.
and somebody in the household would call.
Okay. And was it usually the victim that would call or someone else witnessing, experiencing it?
It would, I would say it was half and half. It would be the victim or
Mm,
some family member in the residence.
okay. Um, we often hear that domestic violence calls are some of the most dangerous for police to respond to. Why is that?
Well, there's so many different levels, but in my opinion, what I remembered was that we're having to receive the information via a radio that somebody is calling in. That person or that dispatcher is having to relay that to us. We've got to formulate a plan or an idea of what we think is going on. Plus, we've got to drive to there. So we've got to get there without having a wreck or causing a wreck. So there's multiple things going on in our brain before we've even stopped our car.
Right.
When we get there, we're on somebody's private domain for one.
Mhm.
They know the residence or the place where we are, which is usually a residence, way more than we do. We may have never even set foot in there before. They know where everything in there is located, and the emotions are at such a high level that anything could start. Could be the spark that causes a fire that gets out of control quick.
Right. And so obviously we're using the word violence, domestic violence, right? So there's a violent actions already taking place. You're talking about the emotions. So there's hostility of some sort, obviously, and then there might be even a sense of maybe hopelessness on someone's part. You don't know if there's firearms there. You don't know if there's weapons. You don't know what you're walking into unless it's a place of a repeated call that we often see on the show Cops, perhaps, and where they're going back and they're like, if I have to come out here again, but that's not always the case. And so you don't know what you're walking into. So it can be quite dangerous for you all. And we often see the sad stories of where an officer is killed or injured responding to a domestic violence call. Um,
Right.
Now, Leanne, we all know that you're a survivor of domestic violence. What type of violence did you endure behind closed doors?
Ann, interestingly, our story is somewhat similar. I was never struck. Most of the abuse was where you could not see it, whether it was banging the back of my head up against a wall, or holding my head against a wall and screaming in my face and holding me by the shoulders. And I might have bruises, but they weren't easily seen or readily seen. So the abuse was more hidden. And I think that, like many people, including when we've talked about this, you often dismiss it because you weren't hit, you weren't struck. And it's much easier to dismiss when that's the case.
That's right. So it was physical, but it wasn't the classic black eye that we talk about. But often before it becomes physical, it's escalated from psychological abuse, right? It's been emotional. You've been beat down with words first before you've ever been touched. So, and some people may never be touched, much less struck, may never have their hair pulled, may never be pushed against a wall, may never be kicked in the while they're sitting, may never have the bruises that are hidden at all. but will have their souls fully battered just with words and being beaten down. Did you ever, Leanne, have an incident to where you called the police or 911 where they needed to respond to your home?
I did. I did not call the police ever during my marriage. Um, but after my marriage, when we start talking about the aftermath, and leaving is just as dangerous as being stuck within the marriage.
Yes.
And I did have to call the police numerous times for stalking, for threatening, for, you know, being outside my sliding glass doors and refusing to leave. And it was frightening. It was frightening for me. It was frightening for my son. And there were numerous times that I called the police. And, I went into it thinking, I'm from a family of officers. I had 5 of them at one time in my life, and I'd never understood the dangers that they faced under a domestic violence situation, but I also didn't understand the and I'm gonna use the word limitations, and Alan, you may wanna correct me on that, but limitations that they had of what they could do in a situation like that, and the responsibility that the victim has as well. And those things are huge, and I think they're important to know.
Right. Similarly, Leanne, I never called the police while I was in the marriage, but I did after a stalking incident. So Leanne brings up a good point. Alan, I imagine the police are limited in what they are able to do. So help us understand like the protocol that you have when you respond to a call. Like what what is the process of responding to a domestic violence call in your experience in your jurisdiction? Because I'm sure it varies state by state and possibly jurisdiction by jurisdiction.
It does, and departments have their own procedures. And our procedure was, we considered our. I was lucky to work for some great chiefs, and all of our chiefs considered that a very dangerous call. So automatically, there would be 2 officers sent to that call, if not more.
Okay.
Um, any domestic, 2 officers were automatically sent. So that was a fantastic procedure that they let us use. But once there, now we've got to know what the stories are. So we will always separate it. First, we want to check, make sure everybody's safe and healthy, or to that degree, because if the fire department's there, they can't come in until we allow them to come in to say it's a safe scene.
Okay.
So we would separate both parties once the safety, their welfare is checked. We would separate them. I don't mean like 5 feet. We would take them to different rooms. We need them to where they can't be inside of each other. And that officer would interview that one. The same officer, once that interview is done, we'll go to the other person, interview that one. Basically, we would swap officers. One officer needs to hear one story from this person and the opposite person, and one person watches the other one. Because remember, when you said earlier, I think you mentioned something about, or I mentioned something about, there may be a weapon on scene.
Right.
To us, anything can be a weapon. I'm not going to take you to the kitchen where there's a bunch of knives. I'm not saying a gun on you, but we always taught our officers there's always at least one weapon on every scene you go to, and that's the one you've got on your belt. So
Mm-hmm.
regardless, there's a weapon there, and you
Right.
take and if alcohol is included on top of that, now that's just another hazard. And sometimes, most of the times, I encountered that one or both parties, were
Mm.
impaired by alcohol. That doesn't help anything. Now we're looking for a perfect storm for a disaster to happen.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love that your chiefs took it serious and took it serious for his officers' safety as well as for the victim and the perpetrator because it can turn in a minute. What kind of signs did you look for? Because what what I know and what Leanne's experienced and other people I've talked to is there's a lot of fear that the perpetrator is going to manipulate the situation and try to turn the story around on to the true victim. So what kind of signs do you look for in a domestic violence situation to try to determine if someone is the victim?
Well, we listen to those statements first, but while we're listening, we will look them over, look the area over where they say an incident may have happened. So
Mm-hmm.
what the area looks like line up with what this person says.
Mm-hmm.
And then same thing with both parties. And then if they say he punched me in the chest or did this, whatever, then we'll may ask to see, was there any bruising? Did you see? Then we'll ask if we could see the wound. And if we have female officers, we'll bring them if they don't feel comfortable. So we got female officers that can help us out as well if it's the female that's the victim.
Right.
But we look for the physical, not just on the body, but as far as the area where the incident took place. And then, of
Okay.
course, if there's any witnesses,
Sure. Okay. So you take witness statements to anyone who may have been there. Um,
yes.
but when you go, you don't necessarily know the history of that residence. You don't know if there's already been a protective order, or if there's, unless it comes out in that interview time, and then you don't even know what's true in that moment. So you're just having to go by. You're really having to
Correct.
assess. Yeah.
But things have gotten much better now, from what I understand, at least
Okay.
in my jurisdiction where I was, and this may be statewide, that there's a database now that the officer can find out instantly if this person has a protective order on them or not.
Okay.
Back in the day, we did, if somebody says, if the victim or whoever the complainant is says, I've got a protective from abuse order on this offender, first thing out of my mouth was, do you have a copy of it?
Mm-hmm.
But
Okay.
now those things are filed, and we're in the computer world, so it's provided to us. Sometimes it could be provided on the way while we're on the way to the scene.
Got it. So often I talk to people and they say they are scared to call the police. Leanne, did you ever fear calling the police? And if so, why or why not?
Wow, that's a really good question. I wouldn't say that I feared calling the police because of the police,
Mm-hmm.
but I was afraid of escalating the situation and making it worse.
Yeah.
I felt like, for me, and I'm just so glad that we're having this discussion, because I think this is something that, male or female, anybody who's in a situation that is domestic violence needs to consider all of their options and when they're ready to deal with it. And it took me a long sorry took me a long time to be ready to deal with it. And I think that's something that the police run into, regretfully, so often. And I think one time you said that the stats are that a victim tries to leave at least 7 times before they actually are successful in doing so. And I think that that's really important. So, yes, I was reticent to call the police, but not because of the police itself, but because I needed to call the police when I was ready to address the issues,
Yeah.
if that
I
makes
get
sense.
absolutely. And I think the biggest fear in the domestic violence hotline, which we have on screen for anyone who is watching, and if you're listening, it will be in the show notes. The National Domestic Violence Hotline has tons of resources available, and they talk about this very thing that you just mentioned, Leanne, and about being ready. And they actually have tips about being prepared to talk to the police. And we'll go over some of those. But when we talk about fearing the police, they actually did a survey. And again, it really wasn't about fearing the police because they are the police, as you said. It's fearing that retaliation or revenge from their partner, or making things worse, escalating the violence, as you said. Um, they worry about getting arrested themselves because they're in relationship with usually a manipulator, an abuser. It's going to get turned on them. They worry about having their children taken away from them because there's police involvement. It's creating losing their jobs. There's this bigger picture that because there's now going to be a legal entity to what's happening behind closed doors, that it's going to expose things, even immigration situations. Okay, so that immigration situations can go. And Caleb, yes, if we can skip commercial break, we'll just keep going. Thank you. We'll take the last commercial break because I know I owe that to the sponsors. But yes, so there's lots of reasons for not calling law enforcement. And then there are a small percentage who fear the police. Now, with immigration situation, I do want to say that you are protected under Title IX. So there are just know and look up and call the National Domestic Violence Hotline. They'll help you with that to know your rights, but you cannot be refused shelter. You cannot be refused support, and you cannot be refused filing for custody for your children. So let's take that out of the equation, or medical care. So there's protection all the way around. All right. So when we talk about the fear of calling the police, this retaliation and all, some of this is real because we hear in the news these stories, right, of things escalating. Protection orders. So Al, tell us what a protection orders are, and are the police involved in that, or is that the court? Do they start with the police? How do people get a protection order?
No, that would be between usually the detective, or in our case, we had detectives that will be assigned whatever domestic violence case we had.
Right.
But if a person's arrested for domestic violence in our jurisdiction, when they bond out, which they have to see a judge or a magistrate within 24 hours. So naturally, when I first started, most of my time was on night shift, and that's when a lot of the domestic calls would happen at that time, where they're not going to see a magistrate at 6 o'clock in the morning or that night, with an hour after they get arrested. It's going to be at the leisure of the whoever the judge or magistrate is that it comes and gives them their little hearing. But they're going to give them conditions of release they have to abide by until their court, their date, if they appear in court. And your detective should be contacting the victim to say, here's the process, and here's what's next. If you're going to come, if you're going to pursue this, we need you to come do this, this, this. And if they can be assigned or given if they think it's warranted, they can have them go and sign an affidavit, read what's taken, make a formal complaint, and a PFA, protective order would be assigned to them. But still, it's a limited protection for the victim, very limited.
Yeah, very limited. And Leanne, you have some experience with this. I did not. I never pursued one. Sometimes I regret it, but I understand at the time what stopped me, which again was fear of escalating, making my abuser more angry, thinking it would not stop him from harming me or my child, and fearing really that it, not more than harming me, that he'd harm someone in my family to get to me. So tell us your experience with protective order.
Well, when I finally left, I left with cracked ribs that happened for the first time in the presence of the children. And I knew something horrible was going to happen if I didn't get us out of there, or as many of us as I could out of there. And the first thing that did happen was I got a restraining order. It was called at the time protective order, and he was asked to vacate the premises. And I was very fortunate because in the state of Alabama then, and I'm not sure what the law is now, many spouses of domestic violence were forced to stay in the same house together. So you couldn't just flee and vacate without forfeiting. And I think that a lot of people were tragically harmed or fatally injured due to those circumstances where they had to stay in the same house together. Once the divorce was final, and even throughout the 2.5 years of the divorce itself, and then up until our son turned 18, I had a restraining order, but it didn't stop the behavior. And there is only so much that a court system and a judge can do to affect a behavior.
Mhm.
And so I went into that not realizing that I thought because I had it, I was protected, and I
Mhm.
really wasn't. Now, it helped, and Alan, you probably have some insight on this. It certainly helped from a legal standpoint if I could show the officers that came the restraining order or protective order, but it didn't stop the behavior. And somehow in my brain, that did not compute until a long way through. And I think that that's important for women to think about and know, that the restraining order, protective order in itself doesn't necessarily keep you safe. And there are a lot of things that you have to do to keep yourself safe, not engaging, not opening the doors. It, that's that type stuff that is very likely to cause the situation to escalate. So, at one point, I even had to be our son's senior year led in and out of the football stadium by protection, just so I wouldn't be out in the parking lot by myself at night. Um, so it was helpful, but it didn't solve the problem.
Right. Um, and so, yeah, because I hear a lot of attitude about that it's not worth the paper it's written on, but it is. It can help you with future uh, legal proceedings. It can show that there's been that pattern of behavior. It can, but like you said, it's not going to stop the behavior of the perpetrator of violence. So, what one thing I want
And
to make
if I could just inject one thing, it's also important to know going into this that if you do call the police and you do end up pressing charges, and that is a very important topic in itself, that I'm sure we'll get to, then you've got to go to court and follow through. And that is financially debilitating, for many people, myself included, especially if it's something that is repetitive, that happens over and over and over again.
I want to make one thing perfectly clear though. If you are in imminent danger, you call the police. You call
Absolutely.
anyone. You do not start debating any of the other factors. You call 911 and get the police there. Imminent physical danger is not a time to
Absolutely.
assess anything else. You don't worry about any escalation. You don't of anything at that time. All right. So restraining orders, protective orders are the different types of orders. It's what I encourage everybody to do is to know their rights and to know their local or their state um, laws, regulations, and how it works. And again, the domestic violence hotline. So it's go to their website, thehotline.org. You can get a wealth of information and guidance, and you can speak to someone 24/7 about your specific situation, and they can guide you for this. So when we talk about um, pressing charges, Al, I'm curious, when someone is arrested, like do you on scene, do you only arrest if someone chooses, or in your jurisdiction, if someone chooses to press charges, or was there an automatic situation to make an arrest?
No, if we can see there's signs that what the offenders say took place, I mean, then we would make the arrest.
Okay.
If that answers the question, we don't. It's not a toss up, a coin toss up. If we see signs that this took place, that this person was assaulted in this domestic situation, then
Hmm.
they're arrested.
Okay. All right. And then from the arrest, it becomes, you said there's a detective assigned to
Well,
follow up.
we normally they'll follow up with the victim.
Okay.
Usually, I mean that's how we did it. but
Mm-hmm.
they have to abide by the release uh, release conditions of the offender has to abide by, supposedly. But it's
Mm-hmm.
just like the order. I mean, it doesn't change the behavior. But we've just disrupted somebody's world. We've taken
Yeah.
them out of their home, um, away from what they think they love, or and embarrassed them, I guess you would say, by putting them
Mm-hmm.
in a jail.
Yeah.
Everything we do, we don't try to escalate the situation. When we even arrive on scene, we try to turn lights, sirens, everything off. We don't want this to go through the roof farther than it already has. But it
Right.
comes down to an arrest. Arrest got to be made because we don't want to leave, and now it escalates again.
Right. Right. Exactly. All right. Well, things, I know that when you and I were talking pre-show, you said that eventually, while you were on the force, you guys would at least leave uh, a card that had resources on it for a victim. What kind of resources and information would you leave victims with?
Well, at the time, again, this is a good 15 years ago, and it's funny you asked because I called today for what to see what they have today. And when I
Yeah.
was there, it was a small, almost business card size or index card size that we would leave with the victim to give them different options of resources from the YWCA or just these different organizations that dealt with either shelter, immediate assistance, that kind of thing. Um, and when I asked for the information today to see what they have, it's no longer a card. It's a good 8 by 10 piece of paper that
Okay.
has the officer's name instead, because we used to have the card plus our case card for
Okay.
further reference. Now
Mhm.
the officer's name, the case number for that particular offense incident is on the paper. It has what the process is. A good half of the page tells the victim what the process is with regard if it's a misdemeanor and it's in a municipal court, or if it's a higher degree case that's going to go to district court or circuit court. What the process is. It has the DA's information. It has our city court information on it, and then it has a 1/4 of the page is nothing but victims' rights. At the
Wow.
very bottom of it, it has the resources listed. So they've gone from an index card to a 8 by 10 piece of paper.
I love that. And I love that because when you're in this, there's this trauma fog, if you will. You can't think what to do, what's next, you are very much the person who's abusing you is telling you what's next and what you're going to do next and how to do it. So when there is someone and Leanne, you shared with us um, a YouTube link to the Dave Ramsey show where someone called in for financial advice. And really what was happening was she was in a domestic violence situation and thought she needed to sell her house, but she was in the heat of the moment. She couldn't think. So that was such an example of being in this fog. You are not thinking. Domestic violence knows no borders. There's no geographical, demographic, anything. We're not separated by education or race, ethnicity,
Right.
anything. It crosses all lines. And so in that moment, in that situation, you are in a fog. So I love that someone's handing somebody something that says, here are your options. Here are your options, because the batterer is going to tell you what to do and when to do it and how to do it, and that you only have one option. So, Al, that's great. I do
And that
think,
you have no rights.
yeah, and that you have rights. And I love that there's been tons of strides made since you've left the force. I know that the advocacy of the domestic violence hotline and other organizations are, really making a difference. And that's what we're trying to do today as well by having this call. There's a lot of myths around domestic violence also. And we often talk about women being the victims because, let's face it, the majority of victims are women and the majority of perpetrators are men. But that's one of the myths, right? That men are not victims. And in fact, they are. Al, were you ever on a call where a male was a victim?
Uh, yes, very few, but yes. And even those, if I best of my recollection, the few that I were on wasn't called in by the victim. I think there would have been either a neighbor or somebody else had called, because the man, I just don't remember. I don't remember. There may have been, but I don't remember a call coming in from the male being the victim. We didn't find that out till we got there.
Yeah. Yeah. But again, a domestic violence does not discriminate. And these men were once boys and most likely in homes that witnessed or observed domestic violence. And children learn what they live, and either they learn to be the victim or they learn to be the abuser. And so we are about to take our commercial break, our one and only. And thank you, Caleb, for allowing us just to continue our flow. And when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about community responses, how we can, that you said a neighbor might call in. Let's talk about that. Let's also talk about the source and maybe what we can do to try to be for preventative measures. So don't go far. We'll be back with more Soul CPR.
Mike Zorek, a three-time California state champion in Greco-Roman wrestling at 114 pounds. Mike, blind since birth, was born in Hartford, Connecticut. He was a six-time national placer, including 2 seconds, 2/3, and 2/4. He also won the Veterans Folk-Style Wrestling twice at 152 pounds. In all these tournaments, he was the only blind competitor. Nancy Zorek, a creative spirit whose talents have taken her to the stage and into galleries and exhibitions in several states. Her father, a commercial artist who shared his instruments with his daughter and helped her fine-tune her natural abilities, influenced her decision to follow in his footsteps. Ms. Zorek has enjoyed a fruitful career doing what she loves. Listen Saturday mornings at 12 Eastern for the Nancy and Mike Show for heartwarming stories and interesting talk on the BBM Global Network.
Are you struggling to care for elderly parents or a spouse? Do you wonder if being a caregiver is making you sick? Are you worried about taking time off work to care for elderly parents and balance work, life, and caregiving? Has caregiving become exhausting and emotionally draining? Are you an aging adult who wants to remain independent, but you're not sure how? I'm Pamela D. Wilson. Join me for the Caring Generation radio show for caregivers and aging adults, Wednesday evenings, 6 Pacific, 7 Mountain, 8 Central, and 9 Eastern, where I answer these questions and share tips for managing stress, family relationships, health, well-being, and more. Podcasts and transcripts of the Caring Generation are on my website, PamelaDWilson.com, plus my caregiving library, online caregiver support programs, and programs for corporations interested in supporting working caregivers. Help, hope, and support for caregivers is here on the Caring Generation and PamelaDWilson.com.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Soul CPR. Thank you for joining us today. I have my guests, Lee Hayes and Al Eason, with me today to talk about this very vital subject of domestic violence. And just before the break, we were talking about some of the myths of domestic violence and the fact that that men, while they are predominantly the perpetrator against women, men can also be the victims of domestic violence. In fact, 1 in 4 men will experience in this country a form of domestic violence, whether it be physical, sexual, or stalking in their lifetime. So we have to pay attention to this. But when we talk about these myths, sometimes the media tells us that men need to should take it, right? Or what are these myths that are perpetrated? But also that prevents men from reporting it. And so maybe the statistics, and so these statistics have been calculated based on private surveys and all to get men to talk. And the LGBTQ plus community have talked about that they are scared to report because of how it will impact their community in general. But again, the domestic violence knows no borders. So when we talk about community and preventing domestic violence at the end of the day, I think of early education. And I think of educating men and boys, or boys who will grow up to be the men who are not only going to be the perpetrators against the women, but also possibly the victims, but also women in learning what the definition of love is. And the hotline defines it as respect. And if you have to learn to respect yourself first and know yourself, and learn the difference between grace and excuse. And that is something that I missed because I let my definition of religion get in the way. And shift the responsibility to the abuser, and recognize it may not be their fault that they're an abuser because of whatever happened to them, because we know that hurting people hurt people, but it is their responsibility to heal themselves rather than harm others. So shifting the responsibility and really engaging men and boys in advocacy and in the work that needs to happen. Do either of you have anything you would add to that? Any thoughts?
I totally agree. Early
No, I mean,
education is critical.
Go ahead,
I mean,
Al.
you pretty much nailed it. You pretty much nailed it. I mean, it's to learn. If you can be, if it's a learned behavior to be abusive, well, then it can be a learned behavior to not be abusive.
Right.
So it started somewhere.
That's
So
right.
if it can start at the home or start, be a church, society, or whatever, learn. They can be taught not to abuse, just
That's
how they learn to abuse.
that's right. And you mentioned a neighbor calling before. And so what can we do if we feel that's or know or have evidence that somebody's being abused? It is sometimes, Leanne, you mentioned you had to be ready. So I want people to know that it's sometimes not the right time to step in for someone. It is always the right time to approach them privately with your concern, but not necessarily to call on their behalf unless they're in imminent danger. Does that make sense? It's always appropriate to talk to them in private, find out what's happening. If they're sharing things with you, keep a journal and track that, because that can be admissible in court and all of that, so that they can end up, you might be a part of their safety planning, and safety planning is important when it's time for them to leave. And we are out of time, and I can't believe it, but thank you, Lee and Al, for joining me today on this emotional and vital discussion. We may have to do a part 2 on this, but my closing thoughts are that no one deserves abuse, and it's never too late to seek help, no matter where you're at in the journey, even if it's after the relationship, because the definition includes anytime you've been in relationship with this person. I believe, Al, we've talked about that. Do either of you have a key takeaway you'd like to leave our audience with?
Go ahead, Leanne.
I just want to tell people that you can get out, and it is going to be better, and you're
Mm-hmm.
going to be okay, hopefully. But there is a way out.
Thank you. Al?
Bottom line is there's a way out, but it doesn't take bravery or courage to abuse somebody, but it does take bravery and courage to decide not to be abused. But that's where
Yes.
there's always that way out, and it's not a normal behavior. So
Thank you. That's right. It's not it's a deviant behavior. So thank you for that, both of you. And it does take courage and bravery, and it's your responsibility to use those resources that Al was talking about, the officers now provide, and to go to this hotline and to get help, because it is your life after all. So use the resources, take that step. Each of us must do our part in breaking the cycle of abuse, and maybe it starts with awareness. If we're the victim, we must leave the relationship and allow the perpetrator the consequence. If we're the perpetrator, we must take the responsibility to heal our wounds and stop wounding others. And this may be a lifelong commitment to doing that work. And if we are the friends, family, coworkers, or observers, we must believe those who tell us and offer our support. If we notice something, we must use our awareness and our knowledge and let them know that everyone deserves to be in a healthy relationship, and that information, resources, help, and guidance is available 24/7 at the Domestic Violence Hotline. Again, Lee Hayes, Al Eason, thank you for being here. Caleb, thanks for keeping us on track. And online, call 1-800-799-SAFE, that's 7233, or text START to 88788, thehotline.org. Thank you for being with us today. I'll see you next time on Soul CPR Healing Out Loud.
This has been Soul CPR with host Ann Papayotti. Breathe life back into your spirit with each episode, where she and special guests explore the relationships that hurt us and discover that healing can only begin with you. Tuesdays at 3 p.m. Eastern on the Bold Brave TV network.